Hello everyone, my name is Chen Hui. I'm a PhD candidate from Fudan University and Utrecht University. My research area is national and transnational images with the emerging film technologies. It is my great honor to participate in this academic conference and thank you very much for watching my video presentation on the screen. What I would like to represent to you is my paper diverse perspective of the shared history, transnational historical images in the interactive documentary. My paper discusses the interactive documentary, A Global Guide to the First World War. This documentary was released in the 2014 on the 100th anniversary of this war. It is a new interactive documentary created by The Guardian. It has 7 video chapters and 6 interactive parts. I mainly want to discuss that how this work relates interactive technologies with historical narratives of the war through a 3-way collaboration between The Guardian, the historians, and the digital materials from the War Museum from the perspective of transnational shared history. To discuss the above issues, I use an intersectional research approach of textual close reading and transnational historical study. I divided the main question into 4 parts. Firstly, I will point out why transnational historical subjects and interactive documentaries can reach a tacit understanding. In the second part, I will point out the close relationship between the multinational shared history of this war told by this kind of documentary, the optional exploration project and its technical dimension of the interactivity. In the third part, I will discuss how the Guardian historians and the War Museum collaborated to establish a transnational historical perspective. I think that it is an authoritative approach to historical narrative. In the fourth part, I will discuss how to go beyond the official history. I think individual narratives are also an important perspective to use for transnational historical narrative. Next, I will expand on the details. On the beginning of my paper, interactive documentaries open up a new way for the reconstruction of history. Unlike linear documentaries, it allows users to explore the historical materials embedded in them freely by clicking on buttons or sliding on the screen under the specific historical theme. Transnational history is well suited to the integrated into web documentaries. The reason is that this type of history is shared by many countries and regions from which they can all have a historical narrative from their own perspectives. Therefore, the documentary can be filled with diverse observations and expressions, which naturally set a stage for some interactive routes of access to the historical information. In the second part, I base on some historical documents and point out that the First World War was not only an intra-European war, but also affected the colonies of European countries on a lot of continents at that time. All of these countries were affected in different ways. Based on this, I think the interactive documentaries that The Guardian plans to take into account those historical facts and designs a story that is shared globally. I combine the director's interviews with the multiple language available at the beginning of this documentary, as well as the narration of 10 historians from 10 countries, and the War Museum's presentation of audiovisual materials from different countries, and the digital map of battlefields on on a lot of continents to demonstrate the transnational vision of this work. And it is argued that this effective fusion of the interactive technology and the historical narrative creates a strong link between the local and the global. Thus, the audiovisual archive has both the dimension of the transnational historical narrative and the significance of generating localized description. In the third part of this paper, I will argue that this transnational shared history of the war is actually conveyed through the collaboration between audiovisual materials preserved in War Museum, historians' interpretation, and the Guardian. I argue that the news report is the first draft of history, and there is a consensus between these two cultures, and the historians who explain the development of the war, and the museum that provides the digital materials provides an in-person testimony that makes the two cultures. Thus, the intersecting narratives between the Guardian, the historians, and the museum ensures the authenticity of the documentary's historical knowledge. I believe the documentary breaks down the boundary between historical scholarship, public museums, and news institutions. But after all, both news reporting and history was written by people. They are not mirror images of the objective words. News is the first draft of history, but news is only the first draft of the history, especially when it comes to the history of such a ground war. The display of spectacular things, the prominence of representative groups, the presentation of history based on the consensus has become a most constant pattern. However, this representation ignores the particular individuals in the war and the impacts of the ground history on them. On this basis, I develop a reflection on the history of authority in the fourth part. I believe that one of the principles of documentary film is authenticity, and this is well reflected in this work. But its authenticity is audiovisual archives sufficient to satisfy the needs of a user? I argue that the historical documentary should not only consider historical authenticity, but should concern with the connection between this kind of authenticity and the individuals, as well as the methods used to reinforce historical authenticity. And the methods used to maximize respect for the individual in the transnational film, in the transnational history. I borrow approach from the contemporary microhistorical studies that devotes understanding individuals in complexity. It is argued that if the perspective of individual is introduced, it can help explore the experiences and ideas of groups that have long been on the margin of world history and contribute to the alternative reconstruction of history and the shaping of individual histories. At the same time, I also argue that the participation of individual fits well with the technical elements of interactive documentaries that place on user agency, which again confirms the ideas I represented in the opening section. Argue that this interactive documentary has made much effort to transnational shared history, and as you can see, it creates multinational perspective that allow the viewers to understand a shared history. However, individual history combines the personal experience with major historical events, which is the path to create a strong connection between the past and the historical memory of the users. And authoritative historical narrative embodied in this documentary ignores this. This concludes my presentation, and I hope you will make valuable suggestions about my papers. If you are interested in this documentary, you can watch it by the link on the PowerPoint. If you want to have more communication with me, please contact me through the email. Thank you for your patience in front of the screen to hear me out. Thank you. Bye.